This is another podcast from Alpha Business Media. Welcome to another deep dive.
Today, we're journeying, metaphorically, of course, to the heart of the Himalayas, Nepal. We're looking at a really fascinating and maybe often overlooked digital revolution happening there.
That's right.
We're going to unpack how global tech isn't just, arising in Nepal, but it's being profoundly reshaped, adapted,
Yeah,
maybe even reborn, you could say, to fit the country's unique realities.
precisely. And while, the big tech conversations usually focus on Silicon Valley or maybe Shenzhen, Nepal offers this really compelling counter-narrative.
Hmm?
It's a story of, well, ambition meeting some very unique challenges. And that's leading to what we're calling Nepalization, which is essentially a fundamental redesign of digital products.
Nepalization.
Yeah. And our mission today is really to show you how this whole process is creating a distinct model for tech development, one that's forged in these real-world constraints. And we've got some great source material to dig into on this, looking at how things like AI, e-commerce, and fintech are adapting. So, yeah, let's get started. Okay, so our sources tell us Nepal has declared this whole IT decade, that's 2024 to 2034. Big ambitions, right? Becoming a major ICT hub, boosting exports, creating, 1.5 million jobs?
Goals, yeah.
And then there's this figure, official government sources claiming almost 100% internet penetration, like 99.38%. That sounds incredibly impressive on the surface.
It does sound impressive. But what's fascinating when you look closer is that these big numbers hide what we're calling Nepal's great digital paradox.
The great digital paradox.
Yeah.
Okay, tell me more.
Well, independent reports like Digital 2025, Nepal, they paint a, let's say, more restrained picture. They show only about 55.8% active internet users at the start of 2025.
Okay, that's a massive difference from almost 100%. What explains that gap?
It's not just, a rounding error. That higher figure, the 99% one, it most likely counts every single active SIM card, even the basic 2G or 3G ones people just use for calls.
Ah, I see. So not necessarily meaningful internet usage.
Exactly. While the lower number, the 55.8%, that probably reflects people who are actually, actively using the internet in a meaningful way, browsing, apps, that sort of thing. And this gap, this difference between just having coverage and having actual usage is a really key driver for everything that follows.
That makes a lot of sense. So this digital paradox, it really sets the stage. How does this feed into Nepalization? What does that term really mean in practice? Is it just about language?
It's much, much more than just translation or, superficial localization. Nepalization is really about a fundamental redesign, a rethinking of digital products and services so they actually work in Nepal's very unique context.
Okay.
So that includes its incredible linguistic diversity. You're talking over 120 languages.
Wow.
Yeah. And cultural factors like specific payment habits we'll get into. And crucially, the infrastructural constraints, the digital divide between cities and rural areas, the massive logistical challenges of that mountainous terrain, even things like unstable electricity.
Right. So it's about building tech despite those challenges or even because of them.
Precisely. Building tech that works within and actually for these specific conditions.
Okay, got it. And we're going to see how this Nepalization plays out in three key areas: e-commerce, fintech, and AI. Let's dive into e-commerce first. The market in Nepal, our sources say, is valued around, US $679.7 million in 2024. So it's growing, ranked 79th globally, driven by smartphones, a younger generation.
Yeah, it's definitely expanding. You've got the big international players like Daraz, which is owned by Alibaba, but also strong local ones like Hamro Bazaar.
But the structure is where it gets interesting, right? Different from what we might see in the West. This leads to what our sources call the platform riddle. What's that about?
Okay, so the platform riddle data analysis shows something really striking. You have WooCommerce, a common platform, right? Powering about 65, maybe 66% of online stores.
Okay, is standard enough.
But then there's this category just labeled custom cart. And these custom-built sites generate a massive 95.11% of total sales.
95%.
Yeah.
From custom carts. While most stores are on WooCommerce, that doesn't immediately add up. Why such a huge split? What are people buying on these custom sites?
You hit the nail on the head. It's all down to one dominant product category: automobiles and vehicles. Apparently, that accounts for almost 90% of all Nepalese e-commerce sales.
Cars and parts, 90%. Okay, wow.
Exactly. So what this suggests is that Nepal's e-commerce isn't really one single market. It's more like two parallel economies running side by side.
Right.
You've got the mass consumer market, lower to mid-price goods, mostly on platforms like WooCommerce. And then you have this very specific high-value market, Probably a mix of B2B and B2C focused heavily on cars, maybe motorcycles, parts, and they're using these custom-built platforms.
So the lesson for global companies is you can't just bring your standard playbook.
Absolutely not. The one-size-fits-all, one-stop-shop model, it just won't cut it here. Success means figuring out how to integrate into these powerful niche markets. And these niches, they're driven less by, say, consumer trends and more by the country's real infrastructural and industrial needs, like vehicles.
That's a really crucial insight. Okay, beyond the platforms, there's this very practical challenge, the last mile problem. Nepal doesn't really have a standardized address system. That sounds difficult.
Difficult is an understatement. It makes delivery a real adventure. Couriers often have to literally call the customer just to get directions, figure out landmarks.
Like a constant scavenger hunt just to drop off a package.
Pretty much. And this exact problem, this very specific local frustration, it gave birth to a perfect example of Nepalization, the Galley Map application.
Galley Map. Okay, so it's like a local Google Maps.
Well, yes and no. It wasn't built to compete with Google Maps on a global scale.
Right.
It was built to solve the specific problem Google couldn't solve there, the lack of addresses.
How does it work then?
The Galley Map team, they actually use cars with 360-degree cameras plus drones to map streets in incredible detail. And crucially, they integrate official house numbers where they exist. So the courier gets a proper address, GPS coordinates, and those panoramic street views to help them pinpoint the location.
That's clever. And their business model.
Also, Nepalized. They don't really sell the map app directly to consumers much. Instead, they sell access to their API, their mapping data, to the big local delivery players. Think Duraz, Pathai, Food Mandu. They all use Galley Map data to make their deliveries actually work.
A localized solution, born from a local problem, serving local businesses. Textbook Nepalization.
Exactly.
Now, what about payments? Culturally, cash on delivery, is that still a big thing? Does it signal a lack of trust in digital?
It's still very popular, yeah. Cash remains king for a lot of transactions. And yes, that partly reflects maybe historical habit, maybe some lingering trust issues with digital systems. It's common in many developing economies.
But that's changing.
It is, definitely. The really rapid growth of local fintech services, we'll talk more about eSewa and Kulti soon, is making a big difference. More and more online stores are integrating these digital wallets.
Right.
And that's slowly but surely getting consumers more comfortable with cashless payments, building that essential trust step by step. It's a gradual cultural shift.
It's fascinating how these local solutions, Galley Map for addresses, these wallets for payments, are truly adapting global tech concepts. And you mentioned fintech. It seems like while Nepal is adapting e-commerce trends, in fintech, they might actually be ahead in some ways, making a kind of tech leap.
That's a great way to put it. It's really remarkable. Instead of going through the slow, expensive process of building a dense network of physical bank branches like many other countries did, Nepal basically jumped straight to mobile banking. And that has become the absolute primary tool for financial inclusion.
And the growth numbers reflect that leap.
Oh, absolutely. The growth is just staggering. Mobile banking users, they surged from about 6.5 million in 2020 to over 20 million in 2023.
Wow, a threefold increase in just 3 years.
Incredible, isn't it? By mid-2023, mobile banking penetration hit 73%. Digital wallets reached 64%. And the COVID-19 pandemic definitely acted as a catalyst, pushing people towards digital payments much faster.
That kind of explosive growth suggests some really strong local players must be driving it. Who are the key innovators, the sort of Nepali fintech titans behind this?
Yeah, there are definitely some major players. At the core, you have these really agile fintech companies that haven't just built apps, they've built entire ecosystems. F1 Soft International is often seen as like the godfather of Nepalese fintech. They developed two huge names, eSewa and PhonePe.
Okay, tell me about eSewa first.
Right, eSewa. It was Nepal's first digital wallet, launched way back in 2009. Now it's the leader. It's basically a one-stop platform. They say over 5,000 services, everything from mobile top-ups, utility bills, airline tickets, even government payments.
So really integrated into daily life.
Massively. They have over 9 million users and this huge network of 250,000 agents spread across literally all 753 local government areas. Those agents are crucial for cash in, cash out in rural places.
Okay, and who's competing with eSewa?
Their main competitor is Kulti, offers a pretty similar range of services. One unique thing they have is the Kulti Bazaar platform, which lets small businesses sell digital goods directly.
Interesting. And PhonePe, you mentioned F1 Soft developed them too.
Yes. PhonePe positions itself a bit differently. They aim to be Nepal's largest interoperable payment network. They connect something like 60 different banks and financial services.
Interoperable, meaning you can send money easily between different banks.
Exactly. Their main product, PhonePe Direct, lets you do instant person-to-person transfers just using someone's mobile number, even if they bank somewhere else. They're also pushing QR code payments heavily and, interestingly, working on cross-border links with India's UPI and Sri Lanka's LankaPay. That shows bigger regional ambitions.
Listening to this, it sounds like these private companies, Isewa, Kalti, PhonePe, they're doing more than just payments. They're almost acting like, well, public infrastructure. Is that fair?
That's a very sharp observation.
Yeah.
And yes, I think that's arguably the deepest, most profound example of Nepalization in fintech. For millions of Nepalese people, their primary way of interacting with the government is through these private apps.
How so?
Paying taxes, paying their electricity bill to the NEA, their water bill to Kanapani. Often the easiest way is through Isewa or Kalti, or their bank's mobile app, which likely uses PhonePe's network.
Right.
Even the government's own official e-government portal, the Nagarik app, relies heavily on payment gateways built and run by these private companies.
So the government leverages their infrastructure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And remember those agent networks. In rural areas, those agents effectively are the bank branches, the access points to the financial system, where traditional banks never really established a presence. So it creates this really interesting symbiotic relationship, maybe slightly fragile sometimes, between public policy goals, like financial inclusion and private sector innovation. And the result? Financial inclusion jumped from about 61% of adults in 2014 to a staggering 90% in 2022.
90%. That's incredible progress, largely driven by this tech leap and these local players.
It really is. It's a powerful example of how private enterprise can step in to fill infrastructure gaps and drive significant public good.
It really is fascinating how these localized solutions tackle such basic needs addresses, payments, financial access. But this problem-solving approach isn't just for commerce or finance, is it? It goes into even more advanced fields like artificial intelligence.
Correct. And again, AI in Nepal isn't some abstract theoretical thing like it might seem elsewhere. Our sources show it's really a set of very pragmatic tools being adapted to solve key national problems. And the most fundamental adaptation, once again, it comes down to language.
Makes sense with over 120 languages. How do they tackle that with AI?
They use what's often called a global strategy. Global plus local.
Not local.
So rather than trying to build these incredibly expensive foundational AI models from scratch, which would be almost impossible.
Yeah, prohibitive costs.
Exactly. Instead, Nepalese developers are taking powerful, often open source global AI models and then specifically retraining them using local Nepali data. This lets them leverage cutting-edge global tech, but make it highly relevant locally.
Smart. Can you give us some examples of these language AIs? What are they doing?
Sure. There's one called Wave2Vec2 XLSR Nepali that's built on Meta's global Wave2Vec2 architecture for speech recognition.
Okay.
But it was then further trained specifically on Nepali speech data sets. And the result is pretty impressive. It achieved a word error rate of just under 6%. That means it's really quite accurate at converting spoken Nepali into text.
That's huge for accessibility, voice commands, transcription.
Absolutely. And similarly, there's Distilled P2 Nepali. This one is based on OpenAI's GPT-2 text generation model.
Right, a predecessor to ChatGPT.
Exactly. It was trained on over 13 million snippets of Nepali text. So it's become quite good at understanding context and generating coherent text in Nepali. This whole approach lets Nepal quickly build sophisticated, localized AI tools without needing, billions in R&D. It kind of democratizes AI for their context.
That's incredibly resourceful, building on the shoulders of giants, but teaching them Nepali. But the key question, as always, is, how does this actually help everyday people? How does this localized AI translate into real-world impact on the ground?
That's the crucial part, isn't it? Let's look at a couple of really important areas. First, agriculture. It's massive in Nepal, employs maybe 2/3 of the workforce, but faces huge challenges, especially with climate change.
Okay, how's AI helping farmers?
Well, in pilot projects, for instance, in the Kavra district, they used AI-controlled soil sensors. The result, crop yields went up by 32%.
32%. That's significant.
It really is. Then you have mobile apps using AI image recognition. Farmers can take a picture of a plant, and the AI helps detect diseases or pests early. That means less guesswork, maybe less pesticide use.
Practical diagnostics in their pocket.
Exactly. They're even looking into using large language models, like ChatGPT adapted for Nepali, to give farmers instant advice on specific problems. And platforms like GeoKrishi are using data-driven insights to help farmers adapt to climate stress. Some models being used to predict dengue fever outbreaks with high accuracy. Those could potentially be adapted for agricultural risks, too.
The potential seems huge there. What about healthcare? Bridging that gap between urban centers and remote rural areas must be a massive challenge.
It's a critical challenge. There's something like a 65% shortage of health workers in many remote rural areas. AI is becoming a vital tool to help bridge that gap.
How specifically?
Take the Marrow Doctor app. In just 1 year, it facilitated 50,000 remote consultations in the Karnali province, one of the most remote areas. That's access people simply didn't have before.
Wow, 50,000 consultations via an app.
Yeah. And researchers are developing AI tools that can use a regular smartphone camera for things like screening for cervical cancer, or even detecting parasites in water or stool samples. Imagine bringing those kinds of diagnostics to the most remote village health posts.
Game-changing potential.
Truly. And there's evidence it works. In Rupanthi district, they used AI-enabled wearable devices for pregnant women. These alerted midwives to high-risk pregnancies earlier. The result, a 22% reduction in maternal mortality in that area.
That's incredible. Real lives saved.
Absolutely. And we're seeing AI models pop up in finance too, helping assess creditworthiness for microfinance loans, again, boosting that financial inclusion piece.
Listening to all this, Nepal's digital journey, this whole Nepalization idea, it really feels like a powerful story. It shows that the most successful tech isn't just about importing the latest global trend, but about deep local adaptation, about solving real specific problems.
I completely agree. Nepalization isn't some sign of being technologically behind. If anything, it's a sign of maturity, of pragmatism. It's about making technology truly serve the community's needs.
And if you connect the dots, you go from galley map, figuring out streets with no names,
Right.
to these huge fintech ecosystems that act like banks where there are no banks,
Yeah.
to AI that literally speaks Nepali and helps save crops or diagnose diseases.
Wow.
It becomes crystal clear, doesn't it? Innovations that emerge because of constraints, not despite them, are often the most powerful, the most sustainable.
It's a recurring theme. Those constraints force creativity and focus on what truly matters locally.
Of course, it's not all solved. Nepal still faces huge hurdles, right? That digital divide between, say, Kathmandu and poorer rural provinces like Karnali is still vast.
Absolutely. Digital literacy is still a gap that needs bridging. And they're still working through the legislative side laws for e-commerce, data protection, AI ethics. It's very much an ongoing
A
process.
journey, not a destination.
Precisely. Yet, despite those challenges, Nepal's journey offers more than just a local success story. It really holds potential as a model, maybe a blueprint, for dozens of other developing countries facing similar situations.
How so?
Well, its pragmatic approach, that global thinking, the intense focus on solving tangible problems. First, it offers really valuable lessons on how you can harness the digital revolution for development that's genuinely inclusive and sustainable, not just benefiting a small elite.
So thinking about that, what does this all mean for you, our listener? As you consider your own region or even just the global tech landscape, think about this. Could similar kinds of local adaptations, these deep dives into specific needs, be the real key to future tech success, even in markets we think of as already developed?
That's a provocative thought.
Yeah. How can constraints, the things that seem like disadvantages, actually be the spark for the most meaningful and impactful innovation? Something to ponder. That's all the time we have for this deep dive. We hope you feel a little more informed, maybe even inspired, by Nepal's really unique path in the digital world. We encourage you, as always, to keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep digging into the fascinating ways technology shapes our world. See you next time for another deep dive.